I'll also just share. It's kind of about the book overall. I haven't gotten a chance to read the last few chapters, but I think what I was really struck by about the book is kind of the essential message, which is that love is not a feeling, love is a practice. And how she talks about the art and practice of love. What we often think of as a feeling is an infatuation, is getting hooked energetically, but that to love somebody, I don't know if I can find right now her list of things that that are included or you have to do to responsibility, respect, commitment, trust. But these are the actions, the practice, the things we do, what we do when we love somebody. And if we're not doing those things, then it's not love. That was really powerful for me.
Yeah, that reminds me of a part early up in the book. I can't remember, but and I also didn't get a chance to finish the book for this week. But when she was talking about the representation of love that we see in the culture and the patriarchy, and at some point she mentioned, you know, we have to change how we represent love, the images of love that we see and what holds our attention. And at that point in the book, I remember writing challenge accepted, you know, like just, it inspired me to want to promote love in that way as an action word. Love is as love does. I think she says that somewhere in the book too. And that stood out to me as well. And I've been telling everyone that, like, love is a verb. Love is what you do. It's an action word. So that's like the overarching message that I got from this book. And it inspired me to, you know, be the change that I want to see. And I'm a person that I love love. I've always loved love. I grew up in a healthy home, and I feel like love is all of, like, well, not really all, but it definitely is everything that is needed in this world, and the true version of it that most of us don't really know. And even as we're reading, we're still learning about it. It's not some fixed definition that, you know, once you understand it from a dictionary perspective, then you got it. You know, you have to continue to work at it forever. So yeah, this book inspired me to definitely be a part of that. And especially now what's going on, I'm seeing a lot of love from people, a lot of different races. I was in Brooklyn, my sister lives out of the Barclays, and it was beautiful to see so many different races and cultures and people protesting. And to me, that was love. That's action. So yeah, this book, I'm gonna read it again. It's one of those books that I think I'm gonna have to read again. So yeah, thank you for whoever chose this book, Ron. This is really good and needed.
No, absolutely.
Thank you, Jess.
I love your shirt, by the way. It's so pretty.
Oh, thank you. So sweet. In the chat box, Kayla, sorry if I'm saying it wrong. Kalia. My sister's name is Kayla. Sorry.
No, not a mistake.
So you shared love of self also begins with practicing saying the last 2 weeks, been honest with yourself and others. When folks ask, how are you? You give them all the feelings, no longer being polite when things are emotionally and spiritually killing me. That's real. I just wanted to like lift that up and share that comment for everyone to take a moment to read it and see if folks have any reactions.
So that's where it starts. Love of self. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm outside, but I wanted to just chime in. I totally agree, because since this book, I didn't give a fuck before, but now, trust and believe. I tell people exactly how I feel, how I should be treated, and I reference it. I'm like, well, Bell Hooks said that I should be treated this way. Bell Hooks says, so I really do believe that this book is like a blueprint for how you should love yourself, how you should love your community, your family. Like, it is a blueprint. Like, I will go back to this book over and over and over again in my lifetime. So yes, I just wanted to jump in and say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. We had everybody in the chat. I love Martha. I love Martha 100%. So you all know right now. So thank you. We love you.
So folks that read, sorry, go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so this book has taught me that, you know, when somebody hurts you, it's just not love. That is not, I heard a lot of times, like in the past, that, you know, love is pain. And I don't know if anybody heard that term before, but love is not pain. And this book has really, it really taught me that. And also, another thing that it helped me was that in creating boundaries. And I think once you know the definition of love and the meaning of it, which means respect, compassion, care, and you know all that good stuff, communication, and you're able to divide the two things, it'll help you more in creating boundaries for those who don't really need to be in your life. And it gives that pathway of bringing new things in your life, better things in your life. So I really do appreciate the book. Some of her opinions may be a little bit, I don't know yet, but on the fence about it. But for the most part, it has helped me internally in terms of self-love and, you know, self-appreciation.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I think that the piece around self-love definitely resonated a lot. And I think how she connected it to the patriarchy and capitalism and consumerism, I think that part was like being able to like clearly see those connections between, you know, and honesty. I think going back to the comment earlier and how like learning how to lie and how that services, you know, consumerism and patriarchy. I think those two notions were really, really striking for me in the book, for sure, too.
Which we're seeing a lot of today, how brittle capitalism is and patriarchy being connected to it when the quarantine took effect, and all of a sudden that quick everything fell apart. You know, it didn't take more than a week for this whole sort of economic system to just crumble. And like everyone needed assistance. There was no really no social system in place, you know, to like really deal with how that sort of capitalism, once it stops, it literally stops dead in its tracks.
And also, I mean, just to build on that, in the chapter 12, which is one of the last chapters here, she goes on about power, which I'll quote in a second on page 221. But it makes it questions like, is love possible in a capitalist system? I mean, it's possible in spite of capitalism, but capitalism itself can't lend itself to love. And on 221, just talking about the patriarchy, as some of you mentioned, which is power, it says we cannot love if we are unable to surrender our attachment to power, if any feeling of vulnerability strikes terror in our hearts. And that's patriarchy. I mean, the number of times it's been brought up throughout the book that men who actively avoid intimacy or close connection because of, whatever perceived threat to their masculinity or whatever you want to say, but it's a matter of not wanting to cede or give up power, really, when you think about it.
Greg, I wholeheartedly agree with you. And you mentioning how consumerism and how love cannot coincide. I think we saw that this week with Kente Gate. Like, you cannot mix the two. You cannot say how much you care about people and all of these other things. But then, like, we all see that, like, whatever war they're raging still has nothing to do with the people who are being affected the most, or at least not to me anyway, because it looks like, oh, we're going to do this because of Trump. You've been seeing people die just like we have forever, and the history and all this other stuff. So to act like all of a sudden there's all this compassion and all this love and, we're in solidarity and all of these things, but still showing your what do you call it? How insensitive you are to even not realize, like, for one, what does that cloth mean to the people that it came from? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is the history behind that? You know what I'm saying? Like, why would you even, like, that is appropriation to the, like, billionth power. Why in the hell would you put that stuff on there like that? Like, what, these black people that were behind, I'm like, y'all didn't say nothing. Y'all didn't say a word. What is going on? And just to keep it short, while Kente Gate was going on yesterday, I went to my doctor, and my doctor said to me, oh my God, I haven't seen you since last year. I'm like, yeah, it's the annual wellness exam, of course, And she was just like, oh, I have been thinking so much of my African-American patients. And I'm like, wait, what? What are we about to do here? And then she went on, she's like, yeah, we really need to be nicer to y'all. I'm like, what is going on? Like, y'all have lost your minds. Like, why? This is not how you go about doing it, because that implies that, like, all this other time, that's never even crossed your mind at all. So the rest of my visit was just like the most awkwardest thing ever. Like, she could barely look me in my eye because she was like, we need to be nicer to y'all. And I was like, no, you just need to be fair. That's it. You know what? You're so right. You're so right. And I'm like, I can't, I don't know what they're doing. They're scared to death. They are scared to death. And I hate that for them, but I'm going to find me a new doctor. But anyway, so, but yeah, the two can't, power and wanting to show compassion and love, those two things, they can never work. They can't. And I mean, I don't know how you can teach that to people, but it can't work.
No, I guess people like your doctor, they want us to let them off the hook. And like the young lady who spoke earlier, I find that I no longer have tolerance for that. I will, when people are talking about it and they're trying to dance around the issue, I find myself now that I just come right out and say, but this happened a few years ago, and this and such, because they just want us to say, oh yeah, thank you. And they can feel good, and they think they've done their part.
think we're going to have to find a new way to love that is not based on patriarchy or capitalism, for that matter. Because even like that situation that was just mentioned, I think it was with Tasha. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the screen. That's about your doctor trying to keep you as at least she believes, the doctor believes she's trying to keep you as a patient, you know, by being nice to you. It is not about any kind of genuine feeling or emotion outside of, you know, you pay your fee and I'll treat you. And there's a lot of platitudes going on across the board that is like masked as friendship and love.
I think for me that last chapter, Destiny, really stood out for me. I'm always thinking, and we always talk about it in my family, like things happen for a reason. And I don't know, like all of these things are coming together and happening right now just because they were meant to happen, or I don't know. But it just, I mean, just like I was saying, it just seems like there's something like above us. In the book, when she was talking about angels, and angels come out when something bad happens, and I mean, I know for me that happens a lot, and just also on page 231, she just talks about woundedness. And I mean, I don't know if it's all coming together. Woundedness is not a cause for shame. It is necessary for spiritual growth and awakening. And then just in my child's mind, woundedness was always negative. Being unable to protect oneself from hurts inflicted by others was a source of shame. And just her just talking about shame and different things like that stood out for me a lot. I don't know. I connected to that.
To piggyback off of Rachel on page 232, again in the last chapter, when she wrote, addressing woundedness is not about blaming others. However, it does allow individuals who have been and are hurt to insist on accountability and responsibility, both from themselves and from those who were the agents of their suffering, as well as those who bore witness. Constructive confrontation aids our healing. And I thought that resonated a lot for me, because I'm just thinking about situations that I've had among family members, and I approach those situations by acknowledging how me being complicit or me not being an advocate for myself created an opportunity for someone to hurt me. So by no means was I justifying the harm, but also acknowledging like, okay, had I done this, the opportunity for you to do that would not have existed. So acknowledging how someone hurt me, but also doing the introspection on what decisions could I have made that would have given you the power to come for me in this way, as opposed to being reactionary to the offense right in that moment. So I can say that I've already incorporated that in my practice, but it was really interesting to see her articulate that in that way.
I have to say, I mean, to follow up with Tasha, I was encouraged by just that concept as well. I mean, she talks about the responsibility of love, like your own responsibility, right? Like on page 210, she says in that top paragraph there, growing up is at heart the process of learning to take responsibility for whatever happens in your life. To choose growth is to embrace a love that heals. And so this whole concept of, yes, Sasha, highlighted, yes. The whole concept of healing and like your role in it, right? Like
So all is not lost for those who are wounded, right? Or those who've been through these moments of intense pain, maybe at the hand of people who we thought loved us, right? And that part of the growing through the pain and reaching that point of love is that conscious choice, right? Like, I don't have to stay here, right? I can decide how I want to respond to that and grow through it. And that choice of it that heals, right? And that we don't have to, through our pain, just stay in that pain, right? We can acknowledge it, like to what Tasha was saying, that we can acknowledge that, and that is the pathway to love, you know. And I thought that was encouraging, right? Like, we don't necessarily have to relinquish our control and give those who've hurt us the power there. We can start on our journey to healing with the choices that we make, right? And with the truth that we live out, right? And so I was encouraged by that.
Can I just add something really quickly to piggyback off of Lydia? One thing that this book has also led me to, like, have an epiphany around. I think I already knew it, but again, sometimes when you see something written,
the reminders,
a larger epiphany is for me. I would even push back a little bit on what Lydia said, because people who hurt you don't necessarily mean they don't love you. And this is a reminder for me in this book that people sometimes are perpetuating these cycles of trauma and don't even have the tools to recognize that they're perpetuating that, or have the tools to fix it. You know what I mean? Like, All About Love is not a mandatory reading. So how many people have really investigated their childhood traumas and so forth? And, you know, I'm thinking about what's currently happening with my mom, which I have mentioned in previous groups. You know, as a caregiver to my grandmother right now, a lot of the traumas that she didn't have to deal with are coming up as now she's my grandmother's caregiver. And I'm just really like, but you ain't dealt with that before, you know? And I just recognized that she didn't have the tools, nor does my grandmother have the tools to address those things. So I'm literally seeing how when someone is stagnated in trauma, and when the trigger is present all the time, how that resurfaces and really bleeds into other relationships. So it may not necessarily mean that because the person has hurt you, they don't love you. It could be that they're just repeating what is familiar to them, or they just don't have the tools to remedy that. And so, like, why I feel like it's encouraging that as reading this book, we are now getting the tools. So not to say I'm gonna be my parents' shrink, but I could just slide her maybe a passage and be like, hey, Mom, you know, something to consider.
Do you think, Tosh, do you think your mom would listen to it or read it?
I think especially for older generations, you know how they say that each generation breaks a part of the cycle? I feel that because so much time has lapsed from the trigger, you know what I mean? Like, she's only been my grandmother's caregiver for the past 3 years since my grandfather passed. And so it's like a lot of times, because we're not doing the constructive confrontation with our traumas, they have been suppressed so much, don't even remember that they exist. And then when the trigger comes and you have to confront it head on, you know what I mean? It's like, whoa, I didn't know all of these things were still very much active in my body. So I feel like what this book has told me too, or helped to remind me, is that I always need to be compassionate with my mom, right? I need to be compassionate with, this is also an epiphany for her as it's, you know, coming back to the surface. So there needs to be a tenderness in how I approach and broach that experience that she's having with her mom. And then also try to way to be tender with my grandmom, who has dementia or onset of dementia, to still have her feel that she's valued in the space for whatever time she's here. You know what I mean? So I would say the book, I don't have to have her read the book, but as long as I practice what the book talks about, that is the teaching, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Thank
It
you.
does. That was Tasha. You said a lot of really good things, and then it made me even go back to like I was looking at the chapter of destiny, but then it was like back to that other to the healing, redemptive love, and just thinking about dysfunctional families. And it's funny because she mentioned AA in like the healing part, and like I mean I hope I'm not like my father's anonymity, but like so he's in AA. He's been in AA for like many years since about like 1996. But it's just interesting because it's like he became like a different person. Like for us, for our family, like him, you know, doing that, and you know, just like he was able just to be like we were able to be a family again, you know, because of his healing and of him dealing with the truth and all of us like just dealing with that. So I mean, not to bring up too much and just like to take it back to the book, but oh man, I found a part. A functional, healthy family is one in which all members are fully functional and all the relationships between the members are fully functional. And that's important for love too, that we just like, I don't know if I make like that balance again. Like your mom doesn't need to read this book necessarily, but just that we just all need to come to terms with things and just, you know, and heal, and that brings us closer.
Definitely. I think if we've been blessed enough, we've all kind of had those relationships. And I'm thinking about what you were saying, Tasha, about your grandmother, and it sounds like, you know, you care for her a lot and you love her. And, you know, what do we know about, you know, the traumas and all that stuff that she may have caused on you or not. But I think about my grandmother and my grandfather and how, you know, my mother told me about all the things that she went through, you know, dealing with my grandparents, and how I never saw any of that. You know what I'm saying? I got to be that grandchild who got to enjoy the love, you know, as pure as you can get from my grandparents. And I was thinking about earlier in the book where Bell Hooks talked about her grandmother, or was it her grandfather? I can't remember, who provided that for her as well. And in that happening, you know, sometimes our parents can get healing from watching their parents maybe not being able to provide that for them at that time, but with time and, you know, hopefully some learned lessons or whatever, they get to benefit, even if it's just my child will never know what that's like, you know. And sometimes that's a blessing and that's a healing part too. And for my mother, even though my grandfather did like a lot of stuff, you know what I'm saying, that still has ramifications today, even though he's gone, you know, he's been gone for a minute. But at the same time, you know, because of the love that he showed close to the end of his life, which, you know, that could be a whole other, that could be a whole other thing, you know, after you've done all your dirt and all this other stuff, and then at the end to be, you know, redemptive, you know, redeemed or what have you, into being a totally different person, you know, showing up for things you've never shown up for and all of this stuff, and getting it in the nick of time. And that nick of time, it was healing for my mother. You know what I'm saying? Like she was able to appreciate the fact that he went out with her, and they would go to the buffets together, and he loved to go to basketball games and all this other stuff. And I'm like, who are you talking about? And she's like, yeah, Daddy. And I'm like, whoa, okay, well, that's what's up, you know. So yeah, redemption, it can still be just as powerful, you know, as maybe it not happening in the first place. But thank goodness for forgiveness, you know what I'm saying? And that heart being forgetful sometimes, it's a blessing.
Martha just brought up a really good question. How do you contend with an awakening within yourself and wanting the people that you hold dear and near to your heart to have the awakening to and not being able to?
Was that for anybody to respond to?
Yeah, for anybody to respond to. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I will say
Mm-hmm.
that I think the letting go is really key, right? So really quickly, I never finished my college degree, and that became a really contentious thing with my father. He's whatever, super smart, and he was like, "Oh my, you're not smart. Why the hell did you get your degree?" Blah 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 blah. Lydia knows what I'm talking about. Haitian parents are crazy. But we Caribbean folks, you know how it goes. And I just remember how that put such a strain on our relationship, and knowing that we both had two different definitions of success. And I remember that, I remember having a conversation with my dad, because I think when I was 16, I like cursed him out, and he held on to that for like a good 15 years. Bruh, it came up in a meeting where we were trying to reconcile. He's like, "Do you remember when you were 16 years old and you said this to me?" Bruh,
Oh
I
my
was a 16-year-old. I was 16, bro. That's what we do. We lash out sometimes. And he was just, because it was not familiar to him, he hardened his heart around that one moment. And I was like, the thing about that is that you're still looking at me through those blinders. I have evolved from that point, and because you're stuck doesn't mean that I'm stuck. And I remember in having that conversation with him, it didn't mean that the glasses came off right away, but I held him accountable for the purview that he was looking through, right? It's just like, I would say, like, don't let that be the thing that you hold on to, because the family is dysfunctional, and that will stagnate your progress of functionality. You know what I mean? So I was just like, bro, you do what you do. You're gonna still wear them glasses. You're probably gonna wear them for about 5 years. But I had to let go of trying to fix something, because I fixed my part and he had to fix his, if that makes sense. Like, I couldn't hold on to that. I couldn't keep fixing his glasses. He had to do that himself. And we much better now. I'll tell you.
Tosh, did you apologize for cursing at your father?
Man, I apologized to that man when I was 16 years old. He must have forgot. I just think that for him, the sting was too hard for him to hear the apology.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's another thing too. I feel that space is also a part of healing. Sometimes trying to rectify the thing in that moment could be like 5 minutes, 4 days. Sometimes people really need to sit along that, because when he broke it down to me, he was just like, no one in my life has ever disrespected me up until my adulthood. And so for that level of disrespect to come from someone that carries my DNA, he couldn't grapple with it. So when he said that, I was like, that's your thing. I hear you. And I will apologize again for my 16-year-old self at 37 years old. Thanks, Daddy.
Yeah. I also come from a Caribbean household, and I cannot imagine cursing at an adult. Like, and I'm not taking sides, but I can understand your father. That you hit him with an axe right in his neck and saying sorry. I mean, I'm sure the apology was more than sincere, but you still, like, I can't imagine Caribbean dad like saying, "Okay, let's move on." Thank you, Tosh. Yes, it was. You've been living here too long. They should have sent you back to Haiti for 5 years.
But maybe that goes back to what she said about setting up boundaries. I mean, Taj, she did what she could do, and then she had to, you know, take care of herself. And I think that sometimes that we lose sight of that fact, that we can only do what we can do, and we spend a lot of time trying to change people and turn them around, when the best thing and the only thing we can do is turn ourselves around and fix ourselves.
How much time does that take? If you got to fix yourself before you can enter into something else, you know?
You can't give, you know, you can't give what you don't have.
Yeah.
And isn't that a little bit scary when you give someone that space to heal? Because we don't know what's going to happen during that time. We don't know how long it'll take that person to heal, or how long it'll take yourself to heal.
But didn't she say something about the grief? I believe she said something, one of the chapters, about death, how the way we deal with death right now is like, it really cripples us, because there's so many things that we felt were left unsaid. We're like, oh my gosh, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. But really, if you've done all that you can do and you poured all of it, you know what I mean? I still feel that that would be, you still have some solace in that you've done your part, and you also gave the person the space to do theirs. You get what I mean? So I don't think that then becomes scary. It becomes like, yo, they had the opportunity, and for whatever reason, if that didn't come up, there's like a solace that comes. And I'm not just speaking for myself, but it may not be true for everyone, but I know in having those conversations, even if my father were not to have spoken to me ever again after that, I felt good. I can feel good in knowing that my last words were for reconciliation, atonement, acknowledgement. And if they chose to take it and whatever, that's on them.
Then I just think about page 212, and she says, in many ways, I have acted out throughout much of my life. When I began to walk on the path of love, I was awed by how quickly previous dysfunctions were changed. And I don't, you know, I'm just like, certain things just like, I just underline, and I don't know if they're making sense in the conversation right now, but they're just standing out for me too, that I think even what Marta was saying, like when you change and you walk in love and you want to kind of stop doing certain things, like how, you know, how does that work for other people in your life? Or how do all of those relationships get affected and they change?
Well, I know for sure some relationships will improve once you start walking in the path of love. And then there'll be other relationships where you're just going to have to end it. And I guess that's where the grieving starts, and you end things. And that becomes kind of scary for a lot of people. I know for myself it has in the past. But I'm glad you mentioned page 212, because above that, I saw my teenage self in this page, where she says, and that pain did not go away even when we left home. More than our pain, our self-destructive, self-betraying behavior trapped us in the traumas of childhood. And, you know, as you read on, she's just saying that sometimes you think, well, as a teenager, or I can only speak for myself. You know, when I was a teen, I was self-destructive. And it was because of my childhood trauma, and it was because I felt that I didn't have love at home. And while I was doing those things, I thought that I was finding peace, but I was not. And not only that, I felt that I couldn't find peace, and I wasn't meant for that. I didn't deserve peace and love. And this whole page was just like, oh my God, like, I guess the self-reflection of my old self. And I I don't know if anybody's going through that as well now, or if they can self-reflect as well. But it's traumas, they are very difficult to handle sometimes. And if you don't have the tools or the right people around you, you can self-destruct. So yeah, that's my take on that page. I'm so happy that you brought that up.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, y'all. I think somebody had, I just wanted to bring up a comment earlier about language and having, I think Greg said, in addition to not having the language, some people aren't interested in finding the language around healing and love, I'm assuming. And yeah, page 212. And acting out. Tasha had a comment here, just how she says that everyone acts out. That isn't the only way people respond to lovelessness. Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with that too. But in terms of like what you were saying of self-destruction and kind of like acting out, um, it shows that healing isn't a linear thing. There isn't like one specific way to actually come to a healing. There can be different points in your life that bring you to that, and also you get tools and language along the way. Maybe when you're 15 years old, you didn't have the language to say, oh, I'm self-destructing, actually, like you didn't have those words to express, and hopefully years later you get more, and then 10 years from now, if you're in tune with yourself, and that way you'll be able to get access to language like that. But I totally relate to that as well, like especially dealing with mental illness, and specifically like wanting to sit in the fact that healing isn't easy, that it's something that can repeat itself. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I'm better now, I don't need to do this, and then it happens again. Like this sort of like learning and patience with yourself and love with yourself, and it has compassion with yourself to like be in the ups and downs of whatever your healing process looks like. And one thing too, I guess I wanted to comment earlier is what Marta was saying around, not being able, like if you're working on yourself and like seeing that other people are willingly not wanting to like learn or not wanting to have the awakening to, and what that looks like. I think, I'm the eldest in my family. I have like 2 younger sisters and 2 younger brothers. And I don't know I don't know how many here are also the oldest, but oftentimes it just feels like, as the oldest, I always try to kind of herd my little brothers and sisters along with me and try to like also show them the way. And it almost always worked against me. I don't know about y'all, but whenever I'm overtly like, hey guys, do this, it's like they always did the opposite. So it's like I basically just started like modeling it in my own self, and I love my sisters dearly, and my brothers. They're little. One is 6, one is 13. But my other 2 sisters, that one is 31, the other one's 25. And so it was almost always like, oh no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And trying to convince them, no matter how many words I use, no matter how I framed it, specifically around politics, I would give an example. And then now, with everything that's going on, they're like, oh yeah, Steph, look, there's a march happening. Do you know about it? And it's like, oh wow, look at that. Like they developed at their own pace, back in 2004 or 5, when I was running around these streets, they were not trying to hear it, no matter how much I was trying to give it. And it brings me to the point of like being able to receive the love, and being able to like receive that guidance, or like whatever it is that you're going through, that you feel your own awakenings and you want to share it with others. sometimes people aren't ready to receive it. And I know also I can speak for myself that there's been times where people have tried that with me and I wasn't ready to receive it either. You know, I couldn't even recognize something as healthy love, or like recognize something as like a healthy way of healing myself, you know, because I just wasn't in that space.
As the youngest sibling of 6, um, my sister was definitely in your shoes, and I was not trying to hear. I was not trying to hear it, but I always listened. I listened, but I would, she wouldn't know, because, and even, it's weird, I'm not saying it properly, just like I'll be listening out to what she's saying, and then I might do the opposite, but later on, like you said, on my own time, I guess, like something will come to me, or I'll be talking to a friend and I'll just find myself repeating what she's saying. So they're listening. Like you said, they came around in 2020. Like, timing is really everything. Like, it reminded me too of a friend that I had that was in like a really messed up situation with a guy, and we kept telling her, like, you need to let this guy go, and then it got to a point where I just didn't want to talk about him anymore, because that's all our conversations would be about. And I'm just like, I felt like I was kind of condoning it by listening and giving my advice. So eventually I just stopped talking about him, and because we weren't speaking about him anymore, she had nothing to say to me anymore, because all she wanted to talk about was him. A couple years later, we rekindled, and you know, she was telling me, like, Jazz, you know, she's like repeating things back to me that I said, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is amazing. So yeah, they're listening, the little seedlings. They'll get there.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, Greg, that's what I felt like. It was so draining, and it went on for years. And she stopped talking to me once I wouldn't talk about him anymore. I'm like, we can talk about other things.
Yeah, and relationships too. I'm sorry. One time I remember I was dating someone and I had to tell her, like, you know, part of like being in a loving relationship, or trying to establish any sort of healthy relationship when someone is dating, is one of those things, like not feeling like it's therapy 24/7. You know, it's like, I'm here for you, but there's boundaries, you know, and when those boundaries begin to be crossed over and over again, and sometimes you let things slide, you end up doing a disservice to yourself. Yeah.
A lot of people equate friendship with just sharing, like a open hydrant, you know, like they should share all the time. And I guess that's not how it really should be. Somebody, Tasha, called it emotional dumping. So yeah. But then you have the opposite, people who never share, and they don't realize that there is a part of relationships that has to include some sharing, but just not all the time, as I've learned.
Yeah, I had to deal with that too, because I don't like to. I'm the one that the friends come to, but then when I'm going through something, I don't want to like push my issues on other people. So it'll be someone that knows me very well and knows the right questions to ask me to get me to really open up and spill, because I won't just like start talking. But then once I do start talking, oh, it's a floodgate.
I'm not a big talker either, except for the book club.
I feel like that relates also to what she talks about with relationships is, and kind of going back to actually to Stephanie's comment, I'm the oldest and I have a much younger sister, and the relationship between us sometimes veered away from sisterly to motherly because there's such a huge age gap. And something I had to learn, and it took a long time to figure out, was that like in addition to there being some boundary issues that seem like they were good, right? It's positive to help your younger siblings as they're making their way through the world. But also my need to always be there for her and never let her be there for me meant I never gave her the space to love me. And there's a give and take. And some of that means you got to give up the space so other people can take it and it actually becomes a healthier relationship.
Definitely. Definitely. I feel that 100%. I get that feedback a lot from my friends. They're always like, Steph, you're always there for everybody, but you never tell us what's going on with you. And this is something that I've definitely worked on. And yeah, thanks for bringing that up because it's very true. You don't allow the space for someone else to love you like that.
I would like to like combine Jessica and Camila's comment because I've had friends that done both. They're like they won't share because they feel like they're burdening their friends, and I'm just like, well, let me tell you if you're burdening me. You know what I mean? Because you're carrying so much weight on your own, and that's how I can show up love. But if you don't give me the opportunity to, one, be there for you, and two, show you how I love myself by setting boundaries, then how are we fortifying a stronger bond, you know? And so the space that Camilla was bringing up is extremely important. And then like what Jessica was saying, like, you know, sometimes it's all about just the attempt to exchange, right? Someone who's actively being introspective and knows how to formulate those boundaries will tell you, you're like, you know what, Jessica, you've been running for about 45 minutes now. I appreciate you. Let me, you know, process what you told me so I can help you out. I'm just using that as an example. But I just feel like allow someone to make the decision on how they want to show up for you. It's really helpful in a way of love.
Yeah, yes. Tasha, you just made me think about that time a long time ago. I'm not gonna bring up exactly what we spoke about, but when you came to my house and I was like going through it a little bit, and you said some things that really like had an effect on everything. Like it's why I was able to get out of the situation that I was in. So like it just kind of like brought it back. So yeah, that like being able to open up to you then was yeah, that was dope. You definitely have a way with words. Your faces, you're so animated. Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
We all do.
Yes, Lydia, for Club Love. Y'all make me so happy.
The same. We'll be back soon. They're doing an insecure summary in chat.
Listen, Ron, don't judge nobody, okay? It's absolutely applicable.
That is my show.
I never saw it. I gotta watch it. I never watched it.
Oh my God.
I got a password if you need it.
Yes. It's absolutely applicable to what we're talking about with these relationships, with friendships.
Absolutely.
Because people feel like, you know, and I think I had mentioned this in one of the previous chapters, that one thing that I felt that Belle did not do a good job in doing is highlighting the importance of intimate friendships, right? Because they can be just as valuable in teaching us how to love
outside of just romantic relationships. You know what I mean? Like, I remember doing a training at Planned Parenthood. Hold on a second, I'm just gonna turn the light on. For my other lines of work or whatever have you. And when they were describing asexual relationships, you know what I mean? They were like, a lot of you are already in an asexual relationship, and some of us are making decisions based on where our best friends are living, you know, who's gonna be the godparent, how they, you know what I mean? So I just feel like that was one of the shortcomings of this book, in that she didn't elevate how friendships can really be the things that supplement the lack of love in families and can be the bridge to romantic relationships. And I just wanted to offer that.
That is true. Not too much on platonic. With as much as she went hard as to heteropatriarchy, she didn't like kind of undo that for herself. The fact that she focused on the two main sort of like cis het kind of relationships and love. She kind of, maybe that was intentional. I don't know,
Yeah.
but it could have.
And I didn't like that part of the
No
book.
say.
It seemed too anecdotal also, like, you know, everything she is presenting facts and citing, you know, the origins and the text, and the two people she doesn't happen to be her ex-lovers or ex-boyfriends. It felt like she became more of a commercial writer as opposed to an academic writer. You know, it felt like she pulled it out of a romance novel, those two things, those two relationships.
Not a romance novel.
It felt like a romance, close to it.
Yo, that. Where's Fabio?
Where is Fabio?
Yo, but it's true. Bringing it back to insecure. That whole like, I that ass have a password if you guys want. Like, it's okay. But like, if you, it's true to watch this last season. Reading this book is true.
Yeah,
Literally,
no, totally.
so much overlap, Especially,
Where can you watch it?
I have HBO. I have Prime, and then I have like HBO attached to my Prime. I could just send you my password.
Okay,
But
thanks.
yeah.
This,
But yeah,
this
like I
season has
think
really been, it seems like Issa probably read this book and coming up with the season script, because it's really, you know, reflects those sort of friendship dynamics that become too close. And when one person overshares too much, it kind of burdens the other person. And Molly is framing their whole relationship now based on the way Issa overburdens Molly with all this information and this kind of this neediness. Yeah, so it's interesting. It is interesting.
Yeah, they definitely have. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say it's interesting too, because now Issa has to go to all these other people because she can't go to Molly. Like you see her, we're talking to her mother. We never saw her mother before. Now the moms come on, you know, like, so now it's like we see more of her world, because before it was just a lot of just her and Molly and just her, I guess the dysfunction, you know, them, and, you know, she's trying to change, and even like her relationship with Lawrence is better because like she's more mature and she's got some tools, you know, I don't know. And light skinned Bay, like it's a lot, you know, he's telling her stuff. He was bipolar. So it's like, it's like a whole bunch of.
where there's mad spoilers, yo. Mute us if you haven't.
You enjoy it.
I'm sorry. That's oversharing.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I'll turn my mic off. I'll turn it off.
But it still reflects that whole friendship dynamic, though. That, you know, Bell Hooks that Tasha said sort of missed, you know.
Yeah, there's definitely, I agree. I think Belle, when I was reading this part about forgiveness and all of these different things, Belle didn't say anything about codependency, I don't believe, which is exactly what I feel like that's what happened with the people that we will not discuss. But I think there was such a long, a long history of codependency, and somebody decided to break that. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes it is a matter of like, you can, you know, when you depend on that same person over and over again for every single thing, they become your be all end all. And you know, if you're not spreading it around and getting different perspectives, you know, y'all get to play off of each other's insecurities and trauma bonds and all of these different things. So I hate to say it, I feel like one of the friends, she broke that, and the other person saw that the bond was broken and not the healthy bond either, and was just like, oh, heck no, you know, because sometimes it takes that cold water to be splashed on you, and then you're like, this isn't what it should be, or, you know, we should be evolving a little bit better or something. I don't know.
But there's a part in the book she does mention the codependency. I just can't remember what page it was. I don't know if anybody else remembers that page. Who could help me out? But
Greg says 214.
can you read it, Greg? I still can't even.
Wasn't me, that was Tasha.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Blame her if it's
Tasha.
wrong.
I see you, Greg. That's how you gonna do me, though. That's how you gonna do me. I see you. That's disrespectful. Yes, it's on.
Sorry.
It's on 2. I can't believe this group. Yes, it's on. It's on 214. It's the second chapter on the page. While terms like codependency, which came out of programs for individual self-recovery.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Greg.
I didn't mean to miscredit Greg. Apologies.
But yeah, she just skims it. She just mentions one word, and then she just talks about interdependency, and then goes straight into the AA conversation.
Yeah, I guess it is a fine line between interdependency and codependency, but I don't know. I mean, how do you stay, I don't know, how do you remain and continue to grow with each other without doing too much, I guess. I don't know, I guess that maybe that's my question. Like, where's the line between interdependency and codependency?
Well, I feel like if you're living for the other person and living for the other person's problems and more for them, and their needs are constantly above yours, you know, notwithstanding parents trying to keep small humans alive, right? Then I think it's when you move into codependency. You know, if you don't have good boundaries, then you need to be really checking yourself about, is this codependency or is this interdependency? But that's how I would define it.
Or maybe if you find that you're the one who's doing all of the emotional labor in the relationship, whether it's a friendship or sexual, or, you know, I don't know, even work relationships. You could end up finding yourself, you're the one who makes all the dates, even if it's not an unburdening type thing. You're the one who remembers everything and remembers the birthdays and things like that. And I think that sort of skips from interdependency to the codependency. You know what I mean? I'm kind of confused.
Okay, I don't want to type this because too much. I was thinking that in hearing y'all talk just now, I was just thinking about like time and how time really isn't discussed in this book, because a lot of time people will equate the length of how long they've known each other and equate that with love. You know, it's like, oh, we've been friends for 20 plus years, but it's not a filling, fruitful relationship. And so actually you're dying because you haven't done the work, you haven't done the honesty, you haven't done all of those things to really fortify something that can withstand. I mean, if I evaluate my relationships, you know, majority, there are some people that have in a shorter span of time have become more important or just as important as people that I've known for 20 plus years, right? And for those people who were there for 20 plus years but didn't really serve me, understand that they have been, or I would address you according to how you show up in my life. I think that especially with social media, the word friend gets used very loosely, and friendship is a type of love relationship. And so, you know, Facebook got everybody thinking with one click, everybody's your friend, and that's not real. And so investigating how that comes up is another thing, like how time shows up and how it's incorporated in this conversation around like what is healthy, what is dysfunctional, what is really love gets muddled in there and not really piecemealed out.
You know what else that didn't come up? Polyamory or like ethical non-monogamy. If folks are familiar with that, I feel like if anything, this text, in terms of how it kind of challenges us to think about love and how we perceive love and when we feel love, I can just give an example of, I guess the first time I was dating someone that was polyamorous and how like my jealousy couldn't allow me to like understand or even try to empathize with polyamory and understand like anything whatsoever. So I was so programmed in terms of like my understanding of love and how relationships are supposed to work between two people, and had these expectations of like one person is supposed to fulfill all the desires and all the needs and everything. I wasn't able to see that. Whereas this was like Stephanie in early 20s, queer baby Stephanie. And then now, fast forward, 34 years old, able to understand like, oh, you were just super, super insecure and jealous at the time and couldn't like understand, and also understanding that polyamory and that love can exist outside of like a couple thing, like a couple situation. Like in the last few years, I'm able to like digest that now. Whereas, when I was early baby queer, get out of here. What do you mean you want to see somebody else? Don't you see what you have in front of you? Like that was sort of like my MO back then. But yeah, this book also reminded me of like to think about, the journey of understanding polyamory now and stuff like that too. Yeah.
I would imagine Belle doesn't really have the range to address polyamory, and it's probably for the best rather than her kind of going off half-cocked like we've criticized her for with some things. It's probably for the best that she didn't address it if she doesn't have the range.
Does she even address, like everything seemed to be somewhat heteronormative in the presentation. I mean, you can make assumptions that, love is the same, but she's framing it in a traditional sense. Which again, this book was written 20 years ago, so not that that's an excuse for not that that's an excuse for an academic, but
right, because she did imply that even in same-sex relationships, one was more dominant than the other. I was like,
Right.
oh, okay, sure.
Which is a hetero way of thinking about relationships.
That's also tied to power, which she's
Mhm.
telling us that to have true love, you need to let go and relinquish power. So she always fucked up. You know what I'm saying? She got the things to work out. She got to do a remix. But it's a good baseline. It's a good baseline. You know what I'm saying? It's a good baseline.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so it's 8:31. We're actually over time. Oops. Thank you all for joining us tonight.